If you are looking for the webinar with Lori Fromm, question and answer about virtual autism, you've come to the right place. Hello, Lori. How are you?
Hi. Thank you for having me today.
Oh,
I'm very excited to be here. And just wanted to say that I'm glad that you're having a webinar on this for parents and others that are interested, because I know that a lot of people have been on your post commenting. And so there has been a need and you recognize that. So thank you.
you're welcome. And before we get started picking your brain, I wanted us to take a look at a typical comment on my website. This is sent from a parent in India in May of 2021. It says, "We gave him an Android for watching YouTube. Afterwards, it was his habit to watch 6 to 10 hours per day, cutting into his sleep time. This toddler was very intelligent. He said words, he was gesturing even in some sentences, and there was never any problem. But when he turned 22 months of age, that's 1 year and 10 months, this is a 1-year-old, he became like nonverbal, not responding to his name, no eye contact, not wanting to sleep, and he started repetitive behavior like flapping." And Lori, does this sound somewhat familiar to you? And that flapping, I know, is associated with autism.
It can be a sign of a repetitive behavior for sure, one that is self-stimulating visually and proprioceptively and tactilely. So this does sound like a case of concern where the family would be, I feel, best advised to try digital screen media removal because the child has had a history of 2 or more hours before the age of 3 with screens on, which would actually lead to less social interaction time with the parent or primary caregiver, which is so important for our children as they grow up. Their brains are developing, and we are the conduit to develop their brain. And so there was less social interaction time due to the increase of screen time. And then I'm sure that was not meant to be, just as in my case, which I'll share later. And that also, if they would try screen removal, they would be able to tell, especially when replacing the screens with highly social interactive activities, if that child made rapid progress, such as wanting to be close to the parents again, maybe flapping a little bit less, regaining some of those lost words would be a sign that this would be a good idea to keep continuing this protocol.
Okay, well, thank you. And I feel like we're jumping ahead a little bit. So let's just look back at how you, as a specialist, discovered this area of virtual autism.
Sure. So I came across this quite by accident. I am an early interventionist, and at the time I was working in Pennsylvania and working with a family that I had known from the evaluation had had a amount of 6 to 10 hours of screen a day and was showing many symptoms of pretty significant ASD diagnosis. This child was about 27 months old at the time, and also English was a second language. And so the mother was exposing him to television to learn English, which she felt was a beneficial thing, as a lot of English as a second language families have felt that way because the parents are able to learn from the television. So I didn't necessarily think anything of it except to let her know of the American Academy of Pediatric screen time to be 2 hours or less of co-viewing after 24 months. And then they can make, she could make her own decision. But didn't necessarily see any significance of the high amount of screen time possibly relating to the symptoms of autism that he was experiencing. So anyway, 6 weeks came of intense early intervention strategies that were tried before we would refer for testing. In the US, testing for autism and a diagnosis usually opens doors for services, and yet it's the parent's complete choice to do so. So I shared that with her. And she said, give me 30 days. We're going to think about it. You know, there's not a lot of autism in our home country, so we don't know too much about this. And when I came back the next week, the child had shown some improvements, and I hadn't seen any improvements in the whole 6 weeks I was working with him. I asked, is anything different? Like, seems like he's having a really good day here. She said that they had decided on a screen removal of her own accord because she felt like he was more interactive with her when the screens were off. I said, wonderful. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. She said she was giving it a try for 30 days. By day 30, this child had changed so much. I was the only therapist in the home. He was at a daycare that was not very responsive to his needs that had shut down 2 months later. And I came back around day 30, and I actually had to walk out and get control of myself because I felt like a miracle was occurring in front of my face. I had never seen a child improve that quickly, and I needed to know what had she done. And here she told me, do you remember how I was removing the screens? Well, I keep doing it. We're on day 30. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Well, here she had also removed all the light up toys, his favorite computer toy. And before you know it, I started just saying to myself, there has to be something to this. And I went home and researched, and I found a paper written by Dr. Michael Waldman and Sean Nicholson and one other co-author about does television cause autism, is what it was labeled. And it is out there for free access on Nuber if anybody's interested. But the gift that she gave me, I was supposed to be the autism specialist, the autism interventionist, was a gift that has now become a passion, because not only was she able to help her son by removing the screens and filling in the time with good social interaction and the early intervention strategies that she had learned, but I was able to help my son, who also had autism, was a year older, using her strategy of removing the screens and good parent interaction and the early intervention strategies that I had always been doing, but never seemed to make any progress till the screens were off. He also had the same history.
So tell us a little bit more about what happened and your approach with your son then.
Mhm. So my approach with my son became, if she can do it, I'm going to do it. This mom was very relatable, and I was very scared at first because I thought the temper tantrums were going to be crazy. He especially liked a certain movie that he would watch at least once or twice a day. And what would we do without that movie? I have no clue. I was a working mom as well, and I was also going through a program for my master's degree. So that had entertained him a lot and kept him happy. He had also started speaking some of the words to that movie. So I was wondering, oh my gosh, like this is going to be a major change for us. He was watching about 6 hours of a day at that time of various types of digital screen media. But anyway, we took it away. There was tantruming for about the first 3 days. And by a month, I was literally thanking God. And my husband and I were staring at each other in disbelief one day at lunch 30 days later because he not only was saying 3-word sentences, he had recognized emotions in our face. I had gotten teared up from being so happy at the progress he was making. He had made little progress during his first 3.5 years. And he goes, "Mommy, why are you crying?" And I was like, oh my gosh. He was very robotic in his language before we removed the screen. So that was also something new.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that personal story. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been, but of course, elated with the recovery. So let's just step back a bit and look at the basics and just say, can you tell us what virtual autism really is?
Sure. So virtual autism, and that is a great question because it's a very new and cutting edge term, was defined by Dr. Marius Zamfir from Romania. And it mimics a classical autism case, except that it has certain precursors to it. And in order to be considered a candidate that could have possibly been affected by virtual autism, the child would have had to have, like I said before, 2 or more hours of screen viewing, the first from birth to 3, less social interaction time, usually due to the amount of screen exposure, not purposefully by the mothers, just like myself. It just, there's only so many hours in the day. And then when this protocol is tried with a child with this history, we find that within the first 30 to 45 days, the response is pretty fast, in that the child is beginning to show more eye contact, beginning to want to be with the parent more, maybe looking at the mouth, trying to make some utterances or gaining words that had been lost, as well as taking an interest in what others are doing. All of a sudden, their world opens up. I remember thinking my son's like peripheral vision had finally come in, and he was seeing the big picture.
My gosh. Wow.
Also, that I just want to say, Jennifer, real quick, that it will test as classical autism on every tool that we know so far, because the symptoms are all there, and the symptoms then are a deficit in communication for autism, social communication, a deficit in speech and language, as well as a deficit or a repetitive and restrictive interest in behaviors. And my son had all 3 of those. And all of the candidates that we have worked with, the clients, the families, would all show that same protocol and that same diagnosis.
I see. Just want to ask you really quickly, before we get to our next question, did you find that it was in fits and starts that he got better, or was it kind of in a straight line sort of trajectory?
So what I did, I had hope because I had saw what had happened with the child before, and I needed to document progress. And so I did. I mean, I knew I needed to document progress. And so weekly, I kept a journal in my phone. And the week to week, the first probably 45 days to 8 weeks were absolutely astronomical development per developmental milestones that a parent could monitor through the CDC milestones if they wanted to. And then the progress started to slow just a little bit, but I continued to keep that journal, and looking over it month to month was a huge amount of progress. So the week to week became slower, but the milestones were more difficult. So instead of just saying one word, those words would be then combined into 2, which takes a child to have a vocabulary of at least 50 words to start combining words. So then once the 2 words were said, it would go to 3. But again, there's time that has to elapse between then. But basically, he was making 2 months of progress a year, which was causing him to be even more delayed than at the end of the year. And when we removed the screens, by 6 months, he had gained close to 18 months of language.
Oh
So
my gosh.
he had not only gained 6 months, but 6 months plus a year, which was huge.
Oh, to say the least. Oh my gosh, I got chills on that one.
Yeah.
What kind of screen use appears to lead to the symptoms that you were describing?
Sure. So the type of screen use that we see, it is just prevalent everywhere, as I think everybody watching knows. But I would say the most common right now are the smartphones, the tablets, and anything that is portable and small, because we're busy people and we're on the go, and the child can easily look at it and hold it. And so that tends to be actually the most detrimental, because instead of everyone sharing the same experience on a television that's in the room, it's only really the child and the screen at very narrow focus. So we usually see a lot of the electronic devices that are mobile as the largest ones, just like that example was in your post. And yet my son was mostly the television.
Mhm.
So,
And you talked about duration.
and so
So,
duration in the literature shows on a study by Chinchaya and several other of the specialists that we work with around the world are finding usually that 4 hour point a day is where it switches from a language delay, usually like, less than 4 hours, but over two can contribute to a language delay in many studies. But that 4+ hours by a researcher, Chinchaya, um, and other case reports from colleagues around the world is what really puts a lot of children at risk. And a lot of us are seeing, and studies have not necessarily been done on this, that the repetitive viewing takes even less time of exposure or greater symptoms of the repetitive and the restrictive interest.
so are you saying that parents shouldn't be excited when their child watches a song 20 times over and then can repeat every word? That's not necessarily a great thing.
They can think it is just like I did. And they can celebrate it again and again, just like I did. They can make capes just like I did and sing with their child because that was his first 3 word phrase. And then 6 months later, he had lost so much language, um, and did repetitive behaviors that I'd never seen before. I felt like my son went from one that was mildly cognitive delayed with a language delay to the repetitive behavior, the restricted interest, and I was losing him.
Mm,
He was getting locked up. And I truly feel that it was related to the repetitive watching of a movie
mhm.
for 6 months, like the restricted interest part.
I see. Okay. Well, this is very emotionally wrenching for all of us. So I
Mm.
would like to just talk to you a second about whether there's anything that can be done. Is there a way to ameliorate the symptoms? And I'm sort of smiling because I know the answer, and it's pretty hopeful. So go ahead, Lori.
Yeah. So we don't necessarily want to say that the autism can be reversed or recovered just because there are children out there with classical autism. There are people, and I work with adults with autism, I work with all families affected that really embrace that as part of their identity. And we'd never want to take that away from anybody. Um, but I would like to think that virtual type of autism, in my experience and my colleagues, can definitely be remediated. And that word remediate means corrected in the symptoms or counteractive of the symptoms. In my experience with my son and a vast number of children that I've worked with personally, removing the screens was at first difficult, like it was for my own family. The first 3 to 5 days, my son was 3.5. When we did it, it was the same for the child who was 2.5, and the same for other families I've worked with children under 5. Usually, the younger, the quicker they forget, just like a pacifier removal or the bottle removal, the sooner the better, as far as like the aftermath for the parents. But this the way to get that remediation truly is from the removal of all digital screen media, including the parents' background television. They have to remove it all. Just put the remote somewhere where you might not even know if you're going to be tempted, um, or have it on when the child is asleep, if you have to, but then also limiting your own use of the mobile devices is so important because they will impede, according to my own experience as well as many others that I've worked with, the amount of social interaction that goes in, because we are all like Pavlov's dog when it comes to our phone dinging. let me look, let me look. And then that interrupts the child's play. And so it's so important to have the high social interaction replace the amount of high screen time. So we see our best results with 6 to 8 hours a day of social interaction that replace the screens. And that can be done not just playing on the floor, but with chores, with different activities with their siblings helping, grandparents doing stuff, just keeping the child busy and with others that they care about and of importance that can be trusted.
Mhm. Okay, wow, that's wonderful, wonderful advice. Um, Now, I'm sure there's parents watching right now that are worried, how can I keep my child from slipping into habits of, well, either my handing a mobile device to a child or the child not being interested in anything else. So what about prevention of virtual autism? What's a parent to do?
Mhm. So my uh, main phrase in this is that knowledge is power. When we know better, we do better. So I encourage you to educate yourself as a mom, as a dad, as however capacity you work with children and an early childhood care provider on the research of how screen media affects child development. Because what a lot of studies are finding and a lot of books that we're going to put on the resource page later that I'm not going to name right now, but will be very helpful in showing some of these similar recommendations. And that would be first for prevention. If you never introduce a child to a television, which means it's not a regular thing, they might see it a little bit at a friend's house or something like that, but it's not part of a regular day schedule for the first 3 years. I would say that would be the first number one. Think about how children were raised before there were never screens. The autism rate was also a lot lower then. And so I took myself back to that when I removed the screens. If they could do it, I could do it. They didn't have a screen, what would they do? And then I did it. So don't have any screens before the age of 3. I wish I could have done that, especially with my last 2 children. Um, Very minimal radio, I recommend, especially for the first year. The child's brain is shown in many neuroscience reports and studies to be just a ball of gray matter that wires to what it's exposed to. We want the brain to match up with what's in the environment. So, real music, real singing, amazing. Real play, there's so much more interaction with that. The radio is just kind of white noise, not making any sense to the baby and taking away from the interaction or what else is going on in the environment. They don't have the ability to multitask yet with that frontal lobe. Also, quality caregiving. If you as a parent can't be there for your child, and I get it, I had to find quality care as well. And you have to pull in from a village, and we all have one. Some of us may need to be more creative than others, but spend the resources front loading your child's education the first 5 years and your child's day, because that will build a brain that is ready to take on the world. As long as their brain is wired in a way that produces perseverance and a way that knows what to do in our world, a lot of adversity and challenge can come their way. And yet, because of the experiences that were positive, they will be able to do what they need to do to get through. And then just the parents just really saying, this is my one and only chance. I have these first 5 years. Let me make the difference that I need to make now. Let me front load my love, my attention, my time as much as possible. We're going to get through this together. And then as they get older, the kids are more independent and will be helpful. So those would be my recommendations.
Did you mention earlier about electronic toys, and what is the deal with them? Are they, how does that affect kids?
So the electronic toys will also take away from what's happening in the environment and from letting the child actually do like a cause and effect type of interaction on their own. they will push a button, all of a sudden this light goes off, the sound goes off. It's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, not really making sense to a child, and distracting them from playing longer because they're not able to figure it out themselves. There's like this big, surprise going on, where research has shown, I believe it was in the New York Times, and we can put this on the resource page as well, that the traditional toys such as blocks and balls and books and like real instruments show so much more ability, because not only does the toy that lights up and has sound doesn't really need somebody else to play with it with you. The blocks take a creative imagination, some problem solving, the blocks fall over, or other children tend to migrate and play with the child, siblings, let me help build blocks, look, and show you. The light up toys just don't provide that opportunity.
Mhm.
So
So
more
that it's
Jennifer.
funny because it's so easy to default to YouTube that it's almost like the adult brain is kind of like, what else can I do? What else can I do? The simple ball is so powerful. And I like to think about what the difference is between the ball that's bouncing across the screen versus that one that's shaped like this.
Mhm. So when we think about a child watching a ball bouncing across the screen, it keeps their attention usually for several reasons. First of all, just like a firework keeps our attention on the 4th of July, it is solely vision, wow, and a big boom, sound. No meaning. We don't necessarily have, oh, that firework didn't mean anything else than the other firework. Do you know what I mean? So no meaning is made with that. So as the child watches that ball, it's bouncing, it's probably beeping or something like that. And they're still wondering, what the heck is that 2D image on the screen? And yet I've got to follow it, because a child's attention span should be just 4 to 6 seconds. And most likely that screen is changing as the ball bounces. So they're kind of getting stuck in the television because it's changing and becoming new again. And that's some research by Pavlov called the Orienting Response. But when a parent or caregiver or sibling or anyone that is in that child's life takes a real ball and rolls it or throws it to the child not only gets to see an interaction and a facial expression that goes with the ball, whether one of a surprise, this, that, gets paired with a word. The more that we talk with our children, the better their academic outcome is by kindergarten. And that would be Dana Suskind's research from 30 Million Words, which we're going to put up there. But they also have the tactile experience. They get to grasp the ball with their whole hand, see how much their hand fits over the ball, tactilely move, and with proprioception and balance. Can I throw the ball while sitting up if they're 12 months old? Hear the ball bounce and see that it is the ball that makes the noise on the hardwood floor. And again, then there's that turn taking, which comes with an object before it comes with speech in infant and toddler development. So we see the child taking turns with an object back and forth with an adult or a different child, which then turns to language. The adult or older child will automatically say, ball, look at this, da da da, comment, ball, again and again. That television or YouTube thing is saying none of that, nor will it make any sense without eye contact, per research on Patricia Call that we're going to put up too.
What I like to say also is that we're talking about a flat 2D environment and a completely round, a three-dimensional environment with all that comes with the third dimension. And so that's just the easiest way to think about a screen versus the real world, that actually has dimension. And
one thing, commenting on that real world,
yeah,
is that a preventative medicine for virtual autism, we have found, is the more the child is outside, it helps also with the symptom dissipation of the repetitive restricted behavior, as well as, I do believe it to be preventative, because there's a variety of sensory stimulation that only the outside can give us: grass, wind, mud, sun, all the things that, sounds of the leaves rustling, that our brain has wired to for the past 200,000 years. Kids 100 years ago were outside, always doing chores. You and I were running around barefoot all the time, till lunch, till dinner, and I would definitely do that with my son. I would just literally kick him out with his older siblings, even in the rain with a raincoat, giving them instruments and other stuff, or keep the garage door open as we played, so that he could have that sensory exposure, even on the coldest, rainiest of days.
Fantastic. Nothing like nature and being outside. And we're going to get to some really good questions coming up. But right now, it happened so much during the pandemic, Lori. The parents were stuck at home working. They were caught between a rock and a hard place. And this is where the screens would come in very handy for them. So the question is, what happens to a situation where the parent is at home and they don't have hours to play one-on-one with the child? What do you recommend?
And I think that's very true of probably 80% of our parents these days are working, moms and dads, two people working all the time. And yet we have to find time for that little one. And I will tell you, had I not known the lesson that I learned as a mother myself with my own son from the family that first showed me this accidentally, I would have been doing the same thing during the pandemic, thinking my child's safe, my child's occupied, I know where they are. And so there's a lot of positives that come with putting the child in front of the screen for the parent, do you know what I mean? To be able to do the work that they need to do, especially virtually. And yet that's probably the worst area a child could be for hours on end during any time of their life. And so, what I would say is if other children are home and doing school at certain hours, that when they have breaks, maybe they could play with the child. If the child could be in a room that's close to some other person in the family, or even if, mom could kind of put on earbuds while she works, but be able to see the child playing by her with a variety of toys that you line up and give a new toy as the child gets bored with the other one. Seeing if they can work in between naps. Parents can take maybe a break in between, but it is hard. And then definitely, just like I said before, getting that good caregiving is essential for daycare. But also, I don't want the mom or dad or any of the caregivers to feel like they only have to play on the floor. That's not the only quality time that we have with our kids. Me as a parent, when I removed the screens from my son, oh my gosh, stuff had to still get done. We needed to do laundry. He loved first me holding him because he wouldn't sit still on the dryer that was beside the washer, but us throwing socks in the washer, but the laundry had to get done. By golly, he loved turning on the button that beeped. He loved, helping mommy hold the cup to put in the detergent and stuff. And the same thing with the dryer. I'd put a ladder up there and he loved being a helper. So don't underestimate their ability. Let them start where they're able to, let other siblings help and involve them in the chores and the everyday routines. Make that diaper change them going to get the diaper, them throwing away the diaper, sing a song in between, and you're going to add up time for social interaction very, very quickly.
Beautiful.
In the car, too. No radio in the car and talking to them in the car. No devices in the car, and count that time as therapy. Comment on what they're looking at, sing songs together as a family, and you also have environmental arrangement of them in a car seat and more attentiveness because they're not able to get away, kind of thing.
Mhm. Okay. Wow. That's great. Great advice. Thank you. I wanted us to get to some of the questions now. And this one is from Dr. Richa. He says, and I think you've answered this, can language regression be seen in virtual autism?
It definitely can. My son was a case of that. As I said, he did have cognition and language delay, but did not have the criteria of repetitive behavior or restrictive interest until we started doing the repetitive watching, and then he lost a lot and regressed. But the nice thing is, he also had scatter skills, which is a lot of children with autism. They have a skill that might be an 8-month-old skill in the developmental trajectory, but they are missing one in the 4-month skill. And when we remove the screens, the areas that he had regressed in, he gained the skills from the developmental milestone that was the lowest in age up. So he gained that 4-month one first, then he went back to the 8-month one that he lost. So, and we've seen a lot of cases like this, but sometimes when the viewing starts from birth, the child might always have shown that delay or that autism symptoms that would be characteristic of virtual autism or classical autism, and not necessarily have a regression and yet still have an explosion of development when they're removed and that screen time is replaced with social interaction. So yes, for both.
And how much time, this writer asks, does it take to get back to normal?
So what our colleagues and myself are seeing in the field is the older that a child is, the rules of neuroplasticity will say it's the brain is harder to change and yet it's still able to change. So the older a child is, the longer it will take, the more severe a child is affected, the longer it will take, and the amount of time usually that the child watched, like a child that watched 4 hours, as opposed to a child that watched 8 to 10 hours, as well as when the screen viewing started, meaning the screen viewing that started 10 hours at birth and hasn't been addressed with this protocol till 4, is a more difficult child to help with the remediation of the symptoms of autism. And yet a child maybe that had 4 hours, we intervened at 2 years, would be quicker. And I would say that one usually a year to a year and a half will be completely caught up with the parents' hard work. And
Yeah.
therapists that are recommended, I always say definitely
So in that whole time, do you think the parents have to keep limiting the screens in the household?
to 0
Oh, okay.
as
All
much
that
as
time. Yeah.
possible.
Mm-hmm.
This mom, meaning me, would wait in the hallway instead of in the waiting room at the pediatric speech and occupational therapy because it had a television. At the doctor's office, I would ask them, why are you playing TV, and took all the toys away? We're going to be outside. Call me when you're ready. And I mean, it went to that amount. And I've seen the same thing when the parents see the progress. It is a self-fulfilling, I'm not going to let my kid be exposed to this anymore. No way. And they'll do the same thing. And I think the more we have to like advocate for our kids as parent, as mom, dad, and people that are informed that this doesn't need to be on in places that solely service children.
Right, right. Great thing to be aware of. I'm going to start noticing that more and speaking up. And lastly, for this particular person, are therapies needed as an adjunct, such as occupational and speech therapy, once this situation is set up in a child?
Mhm. So a lot of parents that we talk to have had their child already evaluated, either with a formal diagnosis or a pediatrician or psychiatrist or psychologist is saying that the child is showing the symptoms of autism. The evaluation may not have been done and the parents just being proactive. And so it is important for them to listen to their caregiver as far as the professional caregiver goes, of the pediatrician, the doctor, and get those services in there. Definitely get recommendations from friends or from the doctor of companies or specific therapists that work well with kids, because we want the children to be engaged. This type of child with this virtual autism or autism in general is harder to engage. So you have to have a personality and that really like reaches out to pull them in and joins them in their world, and can be excited about that. So definitely as much therapy as possible, that the parent, I think, will have a good feel if it's a good fit, and doing positive things. Definitely do that, but never underestimate the power of yourself as the biggest motivator for change, because the relationship drives the behavior, drives the changes in neuroplasticity, especially that emotional connection builds a relationship that helps the child desire to want to be with mom, be with dad, love their family. Do you know what I mean? Act like their older sister, act like their older brother.
Right, right. Fantastic. Let's see, we have, this may be our last question from Hillary Wilkinson, who is also an influencer in this area of children and screens and, being careful to have balance in life. Moving forward out of the pandemic, do you have suggestions for parents to transition their kids off screens, or do you think a hard break is best?
I feel that's very age and family dependent, meaning I can't give advice. The parents know their child the best and what approach they're comfortable taking, as well as what approach is going to be best with their children. I would say any parent that has a child like 4 or 5 and under might just have an easier time in the long run completely removing it and just taking the plunge, throw them in the pool, literally, or something else. But outside fun time is a great replacement. Riding a bike, a yard that is fenced, or if you're out there watching them in the swings, but just replacing it with something that's fun. Strawberry picking. It doesn't have to be anything expensive. Playing with a box that a refrigerator came in, just something novel. Helping the mom or dad cook a recipe, making Play-Doh out of just dough if they're making noodles or something like that. I mean, this does not have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be going to amusement parks or anything like that. Just think, what would you do 100 years ago? And plan that. And also for older children, set a date. Set a date. It's like stopping a bad habit. We can't just say, okay, today, and we wake up. That doesn't work for a lot of people. But a gradual, like, okay, this day is the day, and then pick that date and get everybody on the same page, especially anybody in the household that is an adult, get on the same page.
Yeah, well, since we're veering into the upper age groups, I shared in the chat a link to the Durable Family Pledge, and that is a similar thing, Lori, where the family looks at some habits they may want to start. It's kind of not stop, it's start some habits, and even though they have to do with screens, such as charging your device at night outside of the bedroom, having family meals, reading a book, going outside, getting that hour of exercise a day, that kind of stuff. So the family decides as a group in a family meeting, which I think they need to have in order to pick a date to turn off the screens, that you just put, the family agrees together to follow these habits. Again, it's free, and you can, it's wonderful. I mean, it'd be great for families to get literally on the same page with this and bring it out into the open. So I encourage everybody to look at that. And I also put a link in there to the Virtual Autism post, which we're going to mention in a minute, has a bunch of resources in it. Here comes another question.
Jennifer,
What if,
I wanted to say one other thing that I know
okay,
you and I both do a lot of, when our kids were younger, and we remove screens or recommend now. And that is like family games that are appropriate for the age of the child.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of my kids that'll love Pop Up Pirate that are 2 and 3, you know what I mean? And the family sits and plays and they start learning turn taking and the rules. But
Yeah.
as the child gets older, then Candyland and then, Uno or something like that. And that really provides even 15 minutes a day eating together. I think maybe you said that
Mhm.
probably,
Mhm.
and I think those and reading was something,
Mhm.
reading with your kids, even 5 minutes a day,
Mhm.
you know.
In the pledge, I'm recommending, I think either 20 or 30 minutes as a goal, then
Yeah,
maybe they'll get 5 or 10.
yeah.
Um, so let me ask you this other one. What if a child gets a significant amount of play and interaction,
Mhm.
but sometimes in the evening, the parent watches a sports game or news in the background? What is the damage happening here, if any? She didn't write, or he didn't write that, but that's what I'm saying.
And what would the age of the child be? Did they have that in there? Okay. So again, we would definitely want to honor that American Academy of Pediatrics, which would say before 18 months, it's best just not to do it. And if you do it, I've had some families that, maybe a 6-month-old baby, they will face them away from the screen and play with them like somebody else will, say they're all watching a football game together, or just keep the baby interactive, or place the baby so it's under the screen because the visual stuff is very stimulating. And like if the baby's under the screen and somebody's like on the floor kind of watching up and then interacting with the baby too, the baby's not able to see the screen. And so the baby's still able to see around the room and what's happening in people's faces. And somebody yells, yay! And they're like interested in the yay instead of what's the hat ball doing across the screen?
Mhm.
That makes no sense. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that I would say 18 months and under, try to do those things. When the child becomes older than that, a football game every once in a while, I would think is, being co-viewed is not going to make or break. We're finding, like I said, the 4 hours a day. And the brain does, due to the rules of neuroplasticity, wire to what it's exposed to on a regular basis and a
Mhm.
significant amount of time. So if that's not something that's significant, you know.
Okay. Right. I hear you. Now we have our final question.
Mhm.
My kid was totally normal and we noticed some social deficits at age 21 to 22 months. He became totally nonverbal by age 27 months. That's when we got worried and he was diagnosed as at risk for ASD, autism. He is 33 months now and has made great progress in the last 6 months. What can we do to help him more and how long can we expect him to recover fully? He shows progress each month.
Wow. So did they say that they removed screens at all, or he's just made progress from 27 months when the autism was identified?
I am wondering maybe he will or she will write in the Q&A to tell me that. This is a person that has interacted with the Virtual Autism post.
Okay, great.
And so I'm thinking that they remove
Aware.
screens. Mhm.
Great,
Yeah.
great. I would think
Mhm.
if she had interacted with that, she probably took some recommendations, especially if she
Mhm.
tended to write back on the thread. So first, I want to commend that mom because as a mother myself of a child with a diagnosis at 3.5, when you get that diagnosis or take them early and hear that, it's not an easy thing for a lot of moms. So, but we know that the earlier the child gets the help and the diagnosis, the better the prognosis is going forward. So, I think that that was very brave and very beneficial for her child. And then again, she empowered herself, obviously, by finding your research, your post, and empowered herself to help her child. So I'm very happy that that's happening. That's a response that a lot of people give us, that this 6 months and it's going still very rapidly. And I believe you said, what was her question? How long can I expect?
What can we do to help him more and how long can we expect him to recover it fully? He
Okay.
shows.
He's 27 months now.
He is now 33 months.
33 months. Okay. So I would say to her, read, 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 because at this point, the vocabulary starts becoming very much, instead of just more, it's a lot, or um, huge, those kind of things. So the reading helps build the vocabulary, which helps build the understanding first. Books take us to places that we could never go in real life, meaning you can go to the zoo every day in a book, but you can't do that in, real life, most people. So you can point out animals that the child's not going to see every day, but that from that book they're going to know. And when they know what a zebra is and a zebra does and looks like a horse and this and that, then they can start understanding, and then they can start using that word. So she's going to see language acquisition and also understanding of language, that receptive language, with reading. I would also recommend that she get her child into a group activity with typically developing kids. One that we did that a lot of parents also find helpful is swimming lessons, usually because at that age, the swimmer's not independent. And so the parent can be in there. They meet other friends. They end up having play dates. The children usually get to love the water, even if they don't at first. And then play dates at the house is always nice. And especially with an older peer, seems to work a little bit better. So if her child's 33 months going on 3 soon, she might want to try a 4-year-old to keep that child occupied, because sometimes a child that would be 2 would just kind of wander away, not being able to support the play.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to tell you that, yes, indeed, they remove screens. He had 8+ hours of screen time a day, and that was YouTube rhymes on TV. So it's interesting to know what it is that catches the child's attention. And this deliberate design, persuasive design, is how these things are made, plus the baby's brain. The two of them are just such a, a bad mixture. And so, okay, well, it looks like we are about out of time. What I wanted to do was to make sure that we don't have any more questions. No, we don't. Good. I don't want to leave anybody out. And to go ahead and give your information for folks and leave it up here for a second so they can write things down. That is your email. I know you're getting a website set up, things like that, but they can write to you directly. Is that right, Lori?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I am creating with a co-author a curriculum that's going to be out to help parents who want to try this. And I also, will have a website, and look forward to maybe, Jennifer, people also replying to that virtual autism post to see other people, because what I've saw from the post is a beautiful community coming together that has tried this, and parents supporting each other. And just like that mom and I work together with our children, I'm seeing that you were a conduit for that to happen to many people. So thank you.
Well, I'm very, very happy to be able to provide that. So that's the second link there, durablehuman.com/virtual autism. There is a post with references to a lot of the world leaders in the research into this problem. And it also is it has a link to a website where they actually have posted their research, so you can look there. And there are Lori's suggestions for how to play with a child from the get-go, and also, of course, to remove the screens and not start them basically for the early years. And if you want to, you could go to this TEDx, durablehuman.com/TEDx, where I actually make the connection between adult addiction to social media or video games, and then this new problem of virtual autism. And then those are my 2 books down there that you can see on Amazon, but those are basically, it's kind of like prevention of virtual autism by having habits in your life where you are keeping technology at bay, sort of at arm's length. So you're in charge of the technology, not the other way around. That's what those 2 books are about, which is setting yourself up for success, designing your environment so you can be be successful in your
And
life.
I
Yes.
read both of those books. I'm sorry to interrupt you. And many of these parents have children that have siblings that are older. So any siblings that are younger than the one affected, just do what we're talking about for the affected one. But the ones that are older, I had my son who was 3.5 was affected, but then your books, had they been out or I knew about them at that time, would have been wonderful resources for what to do with my 5.5-year-old and my 7.5-year-old. So I greatly recommend that these parents educate themselves, with quality sources like your books to help them understand how they can also help their older kids, because it's not too late. And those older children, as they're have a healthy amount of tech use, will also be better helpers for the younger ones.
Very good. Well, on that very positive note, I want to thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank all the viewers that are here today for your time. And I hope that, we'll stay in touch and you have a great day and that you stay durable.